The independence of African nations came at the cost of many lives. Gallant sons and daughters for many years fought the colonial powers to bring emancipation and self-rule to the fettered black majority. While a few African nations such as Ghana gained independence in the 1950s, Uhuru started coming to the southern parts of the continent through negotiated deals in the 1960s. However, for nations such as Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia and bordering as it did on apartheid South Africa, the imperialists were not showing any signs of relinquishing power, rather strengthening the dominance of the white settlers with arms and fuel, despite international sanctions. In fact, the rebel Prime Minister of white-ruled Southern Rhodesia, Ian Smith, declared on March 20, 1976, that there would be no black rule in his lifetime and not in 1,000 years.
I don't believe in black majority rule ever in Rhodesia, not in 1,000 years. I repeat, I believe in black and whites working together. If one day it's white and the next day it is black, I believe we will have failed, and I think it will be a disaster for Rhodesia.
In light of such resistance from the colonial rulers, African nations needed a solution to bring liberation to the entire continent. A homegrown solution. So they formed the Organization of African Unity to support the liberation of the rest of the continent. During the first meeting of the OAU in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa back in 1963, the 32 independent African states agreed that action was needed to advance the independence of the colonized states. It was at this conference that the president of the then Tanganyika, now Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, declared that the independence of his nation was meaningless if his neighbors were still under oppression. I ask you to look at the map of Africa. You will immediately realize why, in a very real and special sense, we in Tanganyika, as indeed our brethren in the Congo, cannot be comfortable or complacent in our freedom as long as our neighbors to the south are not free. At present, not because of any greater dedication to the freedom of Africa, but because of our proximity to non-independent Africa, we are already making a humble contribution to the liberation of Southern Africa, but we are prepared to do more. In particular, we are prepared to support the proposal made by our brother, President Sekou Toure, that 1% of our national budget should be set aside for the purpose of liberating non-free Africa. I want to assure our gallant brother from Algeria, Brother Ben Bella, that we are prepared to die a little for the final removal of the humiliation of colonialism from the face of Africa. It was such sentiments, amongst other factors, that led to the heads of state agreeing to establish the OAU Liberation Committee, which had the sole purpose of coordinating diplomatic and material support for the liberation process of Africa. The committee had its headquarters in Tanzania.
Mwalimu put it very clearly that African nationalism is meaningless, is dangerous, is anachronistic unless it is Pan-Africanism at the same time. So this is how Tanganyika and then Tanzania became. And then one of the best examples, I'm sure you may have, out of your research, have realized Mwalimu was even ready to delay the independence of Tanganyika so that we as East Africa become independent at the same time as a federation. And his preferred leader was Jomo Kenyatta to be the leader of this East African. And he wanted to be ambassador of this federated East Africa to the UN. And I think he wanted to make more noises there rather than here. But that couldn't work. We ended up being uniting with Zanzibar, and that's why in 1964 we became Tanzania after the union between Tanganyika and Zanzibar.
Camps such as Mgagao, Kongwa, Chunya, Morogoro, Bagamoyo, all in different regions within Tanzania, became critical in the training of cadres from various African countries to fight for their independence. Both ZANU and ZAPU sent cadres there for training. This is how Tanzania became the inspiration and the first home for the liberation of countries such as Zimbabwe, with initial training by the Tanzania People's Defense Forces.
Almost every liberation movement was here. Southern Africa, from starting with Frelimo was established here in 1962. Yeah, but the Angolan one, Initially MPLA, but even UNITA also had presence here from before the Zambian independence, but even UNIP had representation here. But from Zimbabwe, ZAPU and ZANU were here, and they had established their headquarters here like the rest of the movements. From South Africa, ANC, PAC were here, and had established their headquarters and their military bases and training here. And that was part of a commitment to Pan-Africanism. It was not just slogans. We had everybody who was anybody in the liberation struggle had established a presence in Tanzania.
The Liberation Committee had a series of 3 executive secretaries. The first 2 were diplomats, but the substantive incumbent for 22 years during the Liberation Wars was Colonel Hashim Bita. After the first majority elections in South Africa in 1994, he titled his closing report to the Liberation Committee as Mission Accomplished. Some of its key functions were mobilization of resources for the liberation struggle, mobilization of international solidarity for liberation, assisting the liberation movements financially and materially to execute the liberation struggle, assessing the performance of the liberation movements and giving the necessary advice and assistance, conflict management and resolution within and among liberation movements.
Southern Africa, SADC has got a soul, a political identity. It means that Christopher Mchangwa feels at home in Dar es Salaam, as much as he feels at home in Pretoria, Tshwane, as much as he feels at home in Luanda, as much as he feels at home in Lusaka, as much as he feels at home in Caberons, as much as he feels home in Maputo. We acquired a political soul which the world is to live with. And that political soul is owed more than any other to one man. He gave Southern Africa a political soul, an identity which stands out. We have just recently saw the voting at the United Nations. Our neighbor South Africa prevaricated initially. But when they dug into the history of Southern Africa and looked at the political soul of Southern Africa, South Africa moved back into line and abstained on the vote of Ukraine, just like all the other African states have done, the SADC states have done. Where is it owed to? Because we shared camps in Tanzania, which were superintended by Julius Nyerere as he became the host of the African Liberation Committee, training the nascent African armies, which would later become the backbone of the states of the region.
We were mobilized, not only consolidating our own independence, but we were also mobilized to support the liberation struggle. And it was part of our nation building, and nobody questioned it. Supporting liberation struggle was part of our DNA. It was part of our political culture, and nobody could question why are we doing that, because we sincerely believed that our own independence was meaningless unless the rest of us on the continent were free.
In 1965, under the stewardship of nationalist leader Herbert Chitepo, the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army ZANLA was formed in Tanzania. This was the military wing of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU. The military wing of the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU, was established earlier in 1960 by the nationalist leader Jason Moyo, who was deputy to the ZAPU leader Joshua Nkomo. Until the 1970s, both ZANLA and ZIPRA were based at camps around Lusaka, Zambia for deployment purposes, while the main training took place in Tanzania.
Remember, colonialism was a rite of conquest. We lost military power. That's how we were conquered. The Majimajis in Tanzania, who incidentally, one of their big generals, Mbano, came from Zimbabwe. in the 1890s. That history is not known. Mbano, who was in the Maji rebellion against the Germans, was of Shona origin. He had gone north together with his Wangenda Basungunis into Tanzania. And they saw the uprising which had happened in Zimbabwe with the Mashaya Mombe and the others, and he wanted it done in Tanzania. Go to look at your history. So we lost military power. And one of the uncanny things about Nyerere was the realization of how important to build a state apparatus which is aligned to a newly independent nation. He had challenges with that at the independence when there was an attempted coup against him. So he had to dismantle the colonial state apparatus to safeguard the political independence and democracy of Tanzania.
But how would the cadres from Zimbabwe make their way to Tanzania, and how was life in the camps?
Mwalimu's passion about African liberation is not in doubt. We grew to learn or to understand that in order for a country to effectively support the military involvement in another country, they have to be neighbors. They have to be physically next to each other. But not in the case of Tanzania. Tanzanians gave everything. A lot of us, many of us here know about Mgagao, know about Morogoro, know about many other places in Tanzania that were set aside by the Tanzanians, by Mwalimu Nyerere personally, to train Zimbabweans. And so our earliest guerrilla fighters were trained in Tanzania. And of course, outside they were trained by China. But the basis of our guerrilla movement was in Tanzania. They moved on to Mozambique and effectively across the country.
For the Liberation Committee to be effective, there was need for funding. Independent African countries and others contributed, as did the people of Tanzania, through special initiatives to give a shilling each. OAU members contributed according to their means and ability, as most of them were recently independent themselves and trying to meet the aspirations of their people. Contributions were voluntary, and many African countries made significant contributions, others less so, and yet others provided specialized training in their country or transit facilities. The initial frontline states of Botswana, Tanzania, and Zambia made significant sacrifices in various ways, considering their vulnerabilities to attack.
You may not know Tanzania was the subject of invasion by the Portuguese. They attempted. There was an Angoshe ship which came with the Portuguese mercenaries trying to conquer Tanzania, to invade Tanzania. Just that Portugal was a weak power, but the Tanzanian army repulsed. So we owe it to him that we have a unique, very African defense structure in Southern Africa. It would see Tanzania help Mozambique. It would see Mozambique be freed, which was the biggest victory, which would in turn inspire the biggest social consciousness of the region, which ties in Nyerere with Samora Machel. Because without Samora Machel, we would not have identified our generation to say we can win. But when Nyerere delivered the victory of Frelimo in 1974, and we could see that even though in a weak African country with a spirit, because Tanzania, I remember, is one of the poorest African countries at that time, determination to support us came from commitment, not from capability, from extraordinary capabilities. They used remote resources of Tanzania. Mozambique would be also in a similar state when they supported us. The spirit of Africa was bigger than the poverty which these countries were experiencing. So they went to extraordinary lengths to make us be what we are today.
The training camps were mostly located on farmland, and almost 30 years after the closure of the Liberation Committee, that land is being used for other purposes, such as schools and colleges. But there is an initiative by Tanzania and the African Union to establish liberation trails and youth visits and return some of the camps as they were for this purpose under the African Liberation Heritage Program hosted by Tanzania. This requires resources and research, significant contributions and teamwork by the countries that benefited from these camps.
The primary duty of maintaining those is for the countries which were the guest nations, not the host nation of the national liberation struggle. Because around those camps, if you calculate the number of graves in those camps, then you compare it with the other villages in Tanzania, you probably find more graves there than generally the average in Tanzania. Unless, of course, you go to where the war was fought in the east with Amin. I was at Nyazonya. I was the first one to go and open that camp. It's in a bad shape. The same is with Chimoyo. The same is with Royal Freedom Camp in Zambia. We have other camps in Angola. We need to come to terms with our history by retracing it.
Today, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to preserve these camps.
The president of Tanzania made a call. She was speaking at the 100th birthday of Mwalimu at the new Mwalimu Nyerere Leadership College in Bagamoyo, which is a joint project of the six liberation movements in China. So she made a call. She said, we need to make every effort to preserve, to restore and preserve the camps that were used by the liberation movements in Tanzania. So that even from the Tanzanian side, that is a live item now on the agenda.
Just as it was young people who were at the forefront back in the fighting for the liberation of Zimbabwe, there are millions of young people now in Zimbabwe who need to understand their roots in order to fully grasp the ethos of Pan-Africanism.
This sharing doesn't mean that Tanzania had everything. No. Their coffers were neither wide or deep, nor deep, but the sacrifice. And Mwalimu lived to that commitment and dedication to say, until the whole region is free, we should support everything in any way we can. So I think as the young people, we have a very important role to play in upholding his legacy. The other thing that we can do as the young people is to spread the information. We can start by social media, because it's very sad that my generation finds pride in saying we are no longer interested in reading lengthy text or volume or big books. They go for social media, but the challenge there is when they go for social media, they find distorted information. Why? That attitude of not being attracted to reading, again, it gives them, it leaves them with no option but to go for something that is distorted.
We all know that Zimbabwe fought a terrible struggle, an armed struggle. Without support from countries like Tanzania, Mozambique, and many others, it would have been very difficult. Tanzania, when it gained its independence 60 years ago, Mwalimu didn't take time, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, to take that decision, and which was not an easy decision, to support all the liberation movements from Southern Africa. We all know that he created camps in this country to make sure that they provide accommodation for SWAPO from Namibia, Frelimo from Mozambique, ANC from South Africa, our own ZANU and ZAPU from Zimbabwe, and many others, MPLA from Angola. And that was a lot of sacrifice.
Today, Zimbabwe celebrates 42 years of independence, and it could not have been the case had such leaders as Mwalimu Julius Nyerere not embraced their fellow African brothers and sisters in their fight for self-rule.
The story of the liberation struggle has not been all yet told. Sometimes when I think about, not much has been written about it, which is really unfair for the generations which came after the 1980 and those who come after. And I think there's need to really go out there and trace all those war veterans so that at least their history can be recorded. We are losing our war veterans every day, and each time when we're losing them, it's like we are burning the history of our country.
We have been greeted extremely kindly by the people of Zimbabwe. They sing, they dance, and they say thank you to me because of what they believe Tanzania did for Zimbabwe.
One man, one vote.
Há quem esteja a trabalhar ativamente para a balcanização do país.
I want to fight for my country.
And you make our people feel that they're one.
Everybody must be accorded his full political rights.
Secure progress.
We must be focused.
I can see Africa myself speaking as a continent.
Whatever the difficulties, Africa shall be at peace.